Hi, I'm Indraveer. I'm a solicitor at the HIV/AIDS Legal Centre. We're based in the Acon building in Surrey Hills in Sydney. In New South Wales, there's a coded notification system. So it's a de-identified notification system using the first two letters of your first name and the first two letters of your surname and a postcode. And that's the only information that's provided to the health department. There's a requirement in New South Wales under the Public Health Act to take reasonable precautions prior to sexual intercourse if you have any sexually transmissible infection. So HIV is an STI, and either you have to tell them or you have to take reasonable precautions. While there isn't a specific provision saying use sterile injecting equipment, not using it could get you into trouble if that causes HIV to be transmitted. HIV is not relevant almost 100% of the time in employment. You only need to tell your boss if your HIV is relevant to the work that you do. So to explain, in New South Wales there are only 3 professions really where disclosure has to take place. One is if you're a healthcare worker and you perform what are known as exposure-prone procedures. That's a very small subset of all medical procedures, and they're basically procedures where you have your hands in a body cavity and there's a risk of cutting your fingers. There's a duty, if you are positive, not to perform the procedures, but there's no duty to actually tell the department. The other profession where HIV is relevant is if you're a commercial pilot. Finally, Defence Forces. Defence Forces have an occupational restriction on people with HIV serving, but we're hopeful there might be some change in relation to that sometime soon. And if you're a serving member and you want to do something about that, you should contact us. The other instance in employment where it could be relevant is where you're trying to get accommodation from work. So maybe you have to take a couple of sick days or something like that, or you want to take over and above your entitlements, you need some accommodation at work. At that point you can tell your employer that you have a disability or you have a chronic medical condition and you require accommodation in your workplace. Because HIV is considered a disability under the Anti-Discrimination Acts, an employer actually has to give you accommodation for your disability as long as it's not too expensive for the employer. If you are going to tell your employer, then there are certain things you can do to protect yourself in the event that the employer does something with that information later on that you're not happy with. So there are ways of providing that information that build in extra protections. You need to tell Centrelink if it's relevant to what you're seeking from Centrelink. So for instance, if you're applying for a disability support pension, and one of the reasons you're applying for it is something arising from HIV, then you obviously need to tell Centrelink. If you're claiming New Start and the HIV's got nothing to do with anything, then you don't need to tell Centrelink. You don't have to tell police that you're HIV positive. If you've been taken into remand and you need to get your meds, then you're going to have to tell police about your HIV so that they can organise for you to get your meds. But in connection with a crime, no. The medical services that you get in jail, they're being provided to you by a medical professional. And the same duty of confidentiality that applies if you were seeing a GP, down the road, the same duties of confidentiality apply to the medical services you're getting in prison. So no, they shouldn't be telling anyone else. And if you don't want to tell anyone and you're just telling your medical professionals, then it should stay private. Different countries have different restrictions around HIV. Some countries have restrictions for short-term entry. Some have restrictions for both short and long-term entry. Some countries have no restrictions. Any application that you make to a country is a declaration to the government of that country. So if they ask you about HIV, then by law of that country you're meant to tell them. I'm aware that some people choose not to, particularly for short-term tourist entries, and I know this used to happen particularly with the US for short-term entry. If you're going to do that, just be aware that if entry officials find out that you do have HIV, then the fact that you provided incorrect information on a visa form could result in deportation, for instance. The US have actually removed all restrictions on entry, stay and residence, so you can go there for a little while, you can go there for a long time. As long as you can get a valid visa, the HIV has no relevance. There are migration options for people with HIV in Australia, and we provide migration advice for people with HIV who want to remain here. Australian entry requires you to have a partner generally, or to have specific skills, and the only other real option is humanitarian entry. Unfortunately, the circumstances of your infection are likely to give rise to any entitlement to remain here. So whether you contracted HIV in Australia or whether you contracted overseas is unlikely to make a difference to your visa prospects. The way health insurance works in Australia is that you get cover regardless of whether you have any pre-existing medical conditions or not. The only limitation is that you can't claim on the pre-existing medical condition for the first 1 year. So I'm assuming glasses and dental weren't related to HIV, and in any event, if you made the claim more than 1 year after getting your insurance, it doesn't matter. There aren't any privacy laws that protect interpersonal relationships. So your doctor or your employer may have duties in relation to confidential health information they get from you. That stuff doesn't generally apply to your partner or your friends or your family. If the way in which your partner is doing it is harassing or intimidatory, you could get what's called an AVO, for instance, an apprehended violence order.